Hi guys, welcome back to my next episode of my NHL Deep Dive series. Today we are talking about the Boston Bruins, and we have another special guest for today's episode. You guys probably know him as NHL Ranks on Instagram. We have Michael. He is one of my favorite prospect people in the world, but he's also a huge Bruins fan. So I thought it would be appropriate to have him come on and talk about the Boston Bruins today. And so, yeah, Michael, thanks for coming on. And
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah.
yeah, this should be fun. So this is going to work basically the same way as it has for every other video. We were going to start with the off season for the Bruins, and it was kind of an interesting summer for Boston. There was a lot of moving parts, but I feel like the team is kind of in the same position as they were last season, more or less, where they have their strong defense, and the offense still, at least in my opinion, still has a bunch of question marks on it. But the additions on offense, the big ones, obviously, or I guess the big one was Elias Lindholm, who they were rumored to be in on pretty well all last season. Obviously, went to Vancouver first, but they're able to land him. They also added some depth. They lose James Van Riemsdyk, Jake DeBrusk, Danton Heinen, and Jesper Boquist are probably the biggest uh, departures on this team. Overall, I think the offense is more or less kind of in the same position it was last year, just different pieces. I still have concerns about their depth, but obviously getting Lindholm basically secures that first line center spot, at least hopefully for this season. How do you feel about the off season forward wise for
So,
Boston this
yeah,
year?
forward wise, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, it really does feel like I get frustrated with teams because I like to see a team that's either progressing towards being a cup contender or like is a cup contender. And the thing with the Bruins is feels like we're in a middle ground where this team is gonna just be like a playoff team for the next couple of years. So, but the general thing is I like to see Elias Lindholm brought in as the 1C. It brings a little bit of peace of mind that hopefully we'll get some consistency there. I'm notoriously not Jake DeBrusk's biggest fan, so
Fair enough.
I've had inconsistency troubles, especially in the playoffs and other things like that. I just become like more like sensitive to how well I think a team's going to perform in the playoffs. I look at that first line, I'm like now with some more help for Pastrnak, I think maybe there's better chance that that line could generate offense on its own. Um, yeah, I mean, I think overall, I like how it stands better than it did last year. Is it like that meaningful of a change? I'm not sure about that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think moving on to the blue line here, I think this is kind of where we saw the biggest upgrade, in my opinion, on this team. They add Nikita Zadorov and Jordan Osterley just as depth. They lose Shattenkirk, Matt Grzelcyk, and Derek Forbort. And the way I kind of see this is Zadorov's basically just an upgrade on Grzelcyk, and then Osterley kind of fills the Derek Forbort spot, and then you have a couple of their younger players coming up to kind of fill out the rest of the depth on that blue line. I think Zadorov had a fantastic season last year. Um, once he got to Vancouver, and I I expect him to kind of fill that. Like he feels like a Boston Bruin defenseman, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, yeah.
He's got that physical side to him. He's very sure in his own defensive end. Doesn't bring a ton of offense, but I don't think this blue line really needs a jolt of offense with some of the big guys they have. But I really like what they did on the blue line here. It wasn't a ton of moves, but I think Zadorov really fits that role, and they kind of just got rid of some aging players, and obviously Derek Forbort finally being gone is probably a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel for Bruins fans, I feel.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, but I agree with you there. I think Zadorov's a good addition. There's some questions like historically about how good of a player he might be, but I like the kind of thing that he brings to the defensive core. I'm kind of a fan of that. A lot of it's going to depend on even with the offense. I don't really get to touch upon it, but just how well we see like the new younger players perform. So Laura is the guy he was all right in the regular season last year. Then obviously in the playoffs look like a completely different player, like the player that the Bruins fans probably need and want him to be. So that's kind of the player we're hoping that we get coming into next year. If he can be that way, this defensive core looks really, really solid. But that's never really been the biggest problem with the Bruins is the defense. So I don't know. It's gonna be probably like a lot of depth scoring issues, stuff like that to the forwards. But
Yeah. For me, like the biggest question mark for this team comes in net. And obviously Jeremy Swayman's not signed. We're going to assume that he does get a contract done for the purposes of this video before the season starts. But they obviously make the Allmark trade, and they bring in Jonas Corposalo, who I've notoriously been extremely low on, and uh, I I don't know. I'm interested to see how you feel about this goaltending tandem now. Uh, like I said, like I've not been a Corposalo fan, but he's also never played in front of a defense like this. So
Yeah.
maybe we see some better numbers from him. And even like Jeremy Swayman, which we can touch on more later, is also going to kind of have to be the bell cow on this team now, and that's something that he hasn't had to really do yet.
Yeah.
So it's a group that for the last couple of years has easily been, I mean, more than the last couple of years, really. Because I mean, they had Thomas and Rask before that. The goaltending has always been the strength of this team for years, basically. And I think now it's kind of a little bit up in the air, at least going into the season.
There's definitely a lot of change and a lot of turnover there. I mean, the thing is, it's tough to recall like the last time the Bruins haven't had like a great backup goalie. So that leads me to the question of like we've had Halak, we've had Rask, we've had, then right into Swayman. I'm forgetting someone there, but it feels like there's a chance that it's just like a system that really promotes like strong development out of
It could be it
goalies,
too.
strong performance out of and it'll be interesting to see how the split also works because maybe part of that is the fact that a lot of our goalies have been playing in like tandem, sort of like 1A, 1B kind of deals. If Swayman takes on like that super heavy role, is that going to put Corpusal in a different situation? I don't know. It's tough to see. But I agree with you. I'm not like Corpusal is not a guy who I've been particularly excited about for uh you know not a while. But I'm but we could see what he can do. But I don't know. Yeah, it's a new role for Swayman too. But
Yeah, for sure. So moving more into the offense on this team, uh, first of all, I mean the conversation has to begin with David Pastrnak, who is the second A+ player in my series so far, behind Connor Hellebuck, who I talked about a couple videos ago. And I mean Pastrnak, I mean, still 110 points last year. I think he got to 43 goals. It maybe looked at a bit like a down year, at least scoring wise, because I mean he had 60 plus the year before, but again, he didn't really have a number one line center, or at least a true number one line center last season. Getting him Elias Lindholm, I think, is gonna just get him right back to that high like rocket conversation for sure.
yeah,
And this is somebody who's put up like great underlying numbers the last couple of years. He's been one of the best wingers in hockey. I don't see that really slowing down, especially now that he has like a real 1C to play
mm,
with.
yeah, I agree with that. I would say like especially in the regular season, he's been so dominant. Like you could look even like the distribution of points and scoring and stats among the Bruins forwards last year. There's quite a deviation between like where Pastrnak sits at the top of that ranking and then like the next couple guys that
Yeah.
come in. Um, so he really put the team on his back. I think the biggest question will be like if Elias Lint, I'm pretty notoriously like critical of Pastrnak in the playoffs sometimes. I think he has a tendency. Now it's one thing like 'cause but he's doing so well in the regular season, right? Like he's
Yeah.
carrying the offense, and then it's like a different conversation. So it's like, well, can we expect him to carry the offense in the playoffs too? That's a little bit tougher. So I'm hoping that maybe with some better teammates there, that's going to be like more of a possibility. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. But a regular season, I don't really have any questions. He's gonna be that guy.
Yeah, for sure. I think, Brad Marchand's been somebody who's taken a bit of a step back the last couple of years, and I mean that's expected based on his age. He's still a very good option as like a secondary guy, and obviously bring in Lindholm. The idea is for Marchand to probably be more of that secondary contributor instead of the primary contributor that he was in the Bergeron kind of era. But I still really like Brad Marchand. I'm a big fan of his game. I don't see like a steep decline despite the way that he plays. Maybe like a in the same way that like maybe like a Brandon Gallagher kind of fell off a cliff. I don't really see that with Brad Marchand. I feel like he has enough tools to kind of still be a super effective offensive player, even if like the edge kind of goes away a little bit, if that makes sense.
That's interesting. Yeah,
I
I
don't
think
know. I
that's
don't see the
fair.
big decline.
Yeah. The thing, like, it hasn't been present yet to say like that. So like historically, I haven't seen it. Like he's not. the first line Brad Marchand, who was like in the really high conversations last year, but like well beyond a serviceable second line winger, especially from what we saw last year. Um, I don't know. It is he's had like one of the more unique aging curves in terms of how his
Yeah.
production has progressed. So it's like maybe the tail end, even though he's older, is just like less steep. Um, but I don't know. There's not a lot of like Coyle and Geeky. It's not the most fruitful, second line there. So I don't know how much support I'll be getting, but I don't know what you think about that, but
Yeah, that's kind of I guess my biggest concern with this offense is the depth. I mean, and that
yeah,
was kind of my concern last year as well, but outside of the first line center spot last year, which I think was the bigger issue. But I think the Bruins are really hoping that some of these like younger players that they have are going to step up. I mean, Fabian Lysell is kind of the big one that stands out to me as somebody who like this is the year that he has a golden opportunity to really make an impact on this team. And I mean, he's had a
mm,
pretty good stint in the AHL the last couple of years, and I know you loved him out of the draft, as did I. I'm curious to see kind of what you see his role being in what should be his first full season in the NHL. At least, I guess I'm assuming that's the hope for Boston, especially based on how many guys they lost depth wise and just didn't replace them externally.
yeah. I think, like you said, this is really the year where we start to integrate them into the lineup, start to see, more progression. Hopefully, it really hasn't been the time in the past couple seasons with how the team has been structured, but now, it's a glaring hole, glaring spot for him, especially being centered with like Poitras, another young guy,
Yeah,
potentially Frederick Beecher, someone like that. But really, I just, 2021, I'm talking about one of the most skilled players in the draft, bar none. It was pretty clear. Went into Providence, some questions, I think, from fans regarding like, the attitude problems, that whole narrative went, it's still there. I don't know. But I mean, I'm as high as I've ever been on him. I think the production has been really solid, especially in the AHL. All the signs have pointed towards a pretty smooth, um, uh, sort of like just development from then till now. Has it been like I think he was going like really? I don't know if you remember back 2021. People were like putting him in like at least like the analytics, like whatever you want to call it, like top two, top three pick. That might have been a little
oh
bit of
yeah.
an overestimate, but I think it's more of a testament to the upside that he has.
Yeah,
And we're really not going to see that either go one way, like yes, all right, he's that guy, or he might just be like a middle of the road bottom forward until we start to see how he plays. So I'm going to give him a really long leash. I think Bruins fans are going to be overly critical of him out of the
yeah.
gate because there's all these things, all the expectations, everything's built up. Uh, he's a player who's probably going to need some time and development, and I would love for that to happen in the midst of this season. If it takes a little bit longer, I'm comfortable with that as well. Um, but, but yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see him. I think he could add a real like nice secondary scoring edge to this team that kind of desperately needs playmakers, especially in the bottom six.
yeah,
Moving on to the blue line, this is my favorite unit on the team. I have them as the eighth best unit in the NHL.
yeah,
And it's led by Charlie McAvoy, who like was inches away from being an A+ for me, but I just need to see a little bit that like little bit next step to become like a true Norris kind of candidate for me. But he's at the highest level of an A as I could possibly have him. Um, I mean, I've been a Charlie McAvoy fan pretty much since his draft year.
yeah,
Uh, and I mean, Hampus Lindholm is kind of the other pillar on this blue line. And like, he's a guy who before, like pre Boston, I thought was just like a really good second pair defenseman. And then all of a sudden he goes to the Bruins and he's this dynamic offensive player. And he really became like a staple on this blue line as like their 1B. And
mm,
and even behind that, I mean, like a guy like Brandon Carlo, I think is a really good second line defenseman. Obviously, Zadorov, who we talked about earlier, and even like Andrew Peak, who they retained after the deadline, is is kind of a nice depth like third pair guy. So I really like how well rounded this blue line is. Obviously led by McAvoy, and I easily think it's again going to be the strength of this team as it has been for the last couple of years.
yeah. No, absolutely. I agree with all that there. Yeah,
I guess like what do you see like I know you kind of talked about Lorai earlier. I think he's gonna get a bigger role this season, just based on the fact that they've lost a lot of their depth. Like, how do you see him playing out? I know Daily Faceoff had him paired with McAvoy at the time I made my lines, but do you see him ending up being kind of in that top four?
I think I hope so. I think and the thing I'm not like still I might just be like reminiscent some of the older days of like Krug and other people, but I think there's still not like a guy who is like the power play quarterback on this
Yeah.
team, you know. Lindholm is the offensive defenseman that, we deploy. McAvoy, I've even done some like small research about this, but is probably not providing the biggest boost to the offense on the power play there. So I think this team is kind of desperate for like a player like that. You know, Lorai's been real good. His shot's really good. His passing looked great in the playoffs last year. I think sometimes he looked like overconfident with the puck, holding on to it. But that's something when you don't have the skills, you look overconfident. When you have the skills, when everything's there, then you just look like a playmaking defenseman, like, a guy like that. So it's all about taking that next step. I would love to see him in the top four, keep deploying him like a top four defenseman. Players become top four defensemen, you know?
Yeah.
So just more experience, and yeah, I think he could be that guy.
And I definitely think there's enough like ability to shelter him in this top four that they can
Yes.
kind of give him that opportunity. It's not like a blue line that has a ton of holes.
Yeah.
You can really just throw him out with anybody and give him that growth, and he should be fine at worst.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then yeah, finally the goaltending. Like we kind of talked about earlier, the biggest question mark for me is the deployment of these guys. Like, I mean, Jeremy Swayman's looked fantastic basically since the second he stepped into the NHL, but he's always had, Allmark right beside him. Uh, I don't know what his like game count is ideally in this team. Because he really hasn't like had to worry about that. And again, like Corpusalo coming in, maybe being in front of a better defense helps them. But again, this isn't a team that's gonna like score the lights out either. So I
Yeah.
don't expect the Bruins to be a like winning a lot of games, 5-2, 4-1. So it's finally a question mark, and I still have them as tied for the 10th best tandem, mostly because Jeremy Swayman has earned the right to get the benefit of the doubt more or less. But um, yeah, I'm curious to kind of get your feeling on this tandem.
I think it's probably like a small, like a pretty small increase from Swayman in terms of like the game share that he plays from what we've seen in previous years. I think Corpusalo, honestly, like at one point, I think he's got like significantly more experience than Swayman at this point, right?
Oh
Unless I'm
yeah,
mistaken. Yeah.
yeah,
So at this point, he's like not a veteran goalie, but he's been around for long enough, played for enough teams, enough slots. Now, not all of it's been great performance,
yeah,
but we touched upon it earlier. Playing against that defensive core is going to be a new aspect. I think it's one of those things where if you saw like Corpusalo was like sub 900 at any point, I'd be like really concerned or shocked. Like I
yeah,
think Zadorov, McAvoy, Lindholm, and even the defense, the forwards are providing. It's tough for goaltenders to really, really struggle. I think when you kind of go at it with that perspective, I don't know, like you're limiting the danger on every shot. Corpusal is going to start to look better. You're going to be maybe a little bit more comfortable playing him in kind of more of a split with Swayman and easing him into that one goalie role. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Um, that's what I'm hoping for. That's maybe the optimistic kind of outlook. I don't know. It's tough for me to. Maybe I just haven't been able to cope with a really poor goalie in our system. But yeah,
Well, I mean, if you look at like Corpusala's history too, like his best season, at least from like a base goalie statistical perspective, was the COVID year with Columbus,
yeah,
with that loaded Blue Jackets. Well, loaded as in like for Columbus, I guess. But that really solid Blue Jackets team, and his like his goal saved above expected and stuff wasn't great, but his at least his base stats were good enough for the role. And I think that's kind of got to be the hope for the Bruins here, that the team can kind of just elevate him enough
yeah,
to where Swayman doesn't have to play, north of 50 games, 55 games, I guess.
yeah,
And then they can kind of, I think this team, like the Bruins are a bubble team for me this year. Um, among like six other teams in the East that I think are kind of in that bubble team category. And it's mostly because of the questions on offense and in net. I'll give them. I usually seem to lean the benefit of the doubt to Boston in the past, just based on the history and the core that they've assembled there and kind of the culture that they built. And I'm probably going to do that again this year. Um, but yeah, I think it's just kind of it's the start of a new era. And I just did my Jets video a couple days ago, and one of the things that was mentioned in that was how it feels like this is kind of a transition year for Winnipeg, and I feel like it's kind of the same for Boston. I think this is the start of like maybe a 2 or 3 year retool, I guess is the word.
Yeah.
But I don't even know if I'd go that far. But it's just kind of a restructuring of the culture, and if Boston can stay competitive and stay kind of in that playoff bubble, then they're still going to be a free agent destination for a ton of players. And obviously they were this year getting Zadorov and Lindholm.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess like what do you what's a successful season to you then? At the end of the season.
I don't know. I think what you said is really apt. I think it's tough to like a successful season is a team that contends with the cup, but
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
not what I see as being
Ideally.
possible. You know what I mean? So it's like I don't know. I heard for a long time that like this Bruins team is like one of the worst futures in the NHL and like all this stuff and it never really poised that way. This is kind of the place I thought we'd be in. We had like a
Yeah.
top young goalie, a top young defenseman, a top young winger. Teams like that don't typically like go through full rebuilds. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a progressive retool. The best successful season is a season where the Bruins' young forwards and young defensemen, so that's Lohrei, Petra, Liesel, even Brazeau, perhaps. I don't know. Maybe Swayman, takes that role. All those guys like fit comfortably in the roster, and they're not
Yeah.
like conversations like fringe players anymore. All those people can start to learn how to produce on themselves, and if that works out like that, then this is a team that I think like is a couple of years away, like you said, from being back in contention, like at the top of the league. Right now, you look at Petra and all these guys who are like third line kind of rookies, young players. Um, it's like this isn't a team that right now is going to make too much noise. But the most successful version of this team, I think, is a team where all those players can maybe fit into the top six, middle six roles. And that Bruins team is, I think, the team that I'm pretty feeling good about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I mean, Boston's shown enough ability to find kind of those guys in the draft, the supplemental guys. They've been, good enough the last couple years in that aspect. And I mean, obviously being a fringe playoff team is going to attract free agents as well. So yeah, I never really saw them as a completely bottom out like Montreal Canadiens-esque rebuild.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's definitely a fascinating time, and it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate the next year or two, because it's kind of this is going to be the time that really determines what this team's going to look like in 6 or 7 years, I think.
Yeah. I totally agree with
Um,
that. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah, I think that's about it for the Boston Bruins. If you have anything you want to plug or tell the people where they can find you, feel free.
Yeah, not really. I'm not Ranks.stats has been a little quiet recently. I've been working on some other stuff, but I'll be around generally. You shoot me any questions or anything got going on. So yeah, drop me a follow there if you're interested. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
and like I said, he just finished his 32 team prospect rankings, so go check that
Yes.
out.
Yeah,
One of my favorite prospect pages on Instagram. So
I appreciate it.
if you're not following him already, I highly recommend it. But yeah, thanks again
Yeah.
for stopping in, and yeah, make sure if you're watching to like and subscribe, and the next episode should be out soon.